X-ray here, talking about the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman trial, and they are about to come up with a decision because they're right in the middle of deliberations. And today I have a lot I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about the case itself. I want to talk about manslaughter, whether or not George Zimmerman will be convicted of manslaughter. And I also want to talk about just the evidence in this case from now that everything has come out in the open. Okay, so X-ray here is going to penetrate through all the BS, and let's talk about what we have so far. As I told you guys last year, that this case didn't have any evidence. There just wasn't. And the reason why I knew that is because the FBI looked at this case. It wasn't just the state. It wasn't just the city police. It was the FBI, a separate federal investigation, and they came up with nothing. And the reason why I knew they came up with nothing is because I'm sure they would have said something a couple weeks after the investigation. So look at what happened here in this case. Witness after witness, even the prosecution's witness, basically sided with George Zimmerman. This was, in my opinion, this was an embarrassment to the state attorney's office and the state of Florida. They're prosecuting a case that they just didn't have any evidence for. I'm not saying that George Zimmerman didn't do anything wrong, but you can't keep bringing up cases where you don't have any evidence, okay? And that's the problem, okay? It's not that I don't feel bad for Trayvon Martin. Of course I feel bad for any family member that loses a life. But you have to have evidence. We can't change the law based upon, what you think, okay? Because if that happened, we'd all be in trouble, Someone could just accuse us, and if the story sounds good, we'd all be put in jail. So let's take a look at what the prosecution did. They didn't have any evidence, so what do? They go and try to buy witnesses, right? They went and got these hokey voice forensic experts, right? And, they weren't using scientific standards to come up with their conclusion on who was yelling on that 911 call. That's desperation. You can't just hire people that, aren't, using a grade A, analysis to do your analysis, because the judge is going to see right through it and they're going to throw it right out of court. And that's exactly what Judge Deborah Nelson did. And then they went and tried to get that medical examiner, who didn't even examine George Zimmerman. See, this is what they have to do to win this case because they don't have the evidence. And that's what happens when you try to prosecute a case in which you have no evidence. You might think that the person did something wrong, but you have to prove it. So anyway, so what about manslaughter, okay? Because we definitely know right now, there's a bunch of videos out there, and you could, YouTube search those ones, and you could see that there are many, many lawyers that feel that, you can't win the prosecution can't win this case. I would say 80% of the lawyers out there do not feel that the prosecution can win this case. Now, what about manslaughter? Okay, that's a common topic, and a lot of people aren't really talking about it. But manslaughter is basically the same burden of proof, okay? Has to be proof beyond reasonable doubt. The difference between manslaughter and murder, too, is that manslaughter, you don't have to show ill will. Instead, what you got to show is that there is gross negligence, okay? Now, George Zimmerman didn't identify himself. Is that negligent? Yeah, it is. Is it gross negligence? I don't think so. I think a lot of people could have made the same mistake. And when you're talking gross negligence, you're talking about mistakes that like 90% of people would not make, okay? And I do think that probably 30% of the people would forget to identify themselves, especially if they're, shocked. Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman thought that he ran away and he lost him, and all of a sudden he comes back walking from Retreat View Circle, and he sees this kid facing him, right? Okay, so yeah, and then, of course, you have the fact that Trayvon Martin, pummeled him, right? I mean, it's hard to argue against the forensics. I mean, some people can argue all these things. Well, like Trayvon was scared too, and he was, defending himself, but I find that a little bit hard to believe because of the fact that Trayvon Martin was right where he was when he started running. And to me, I don't see why he ran away, why he didn't keep running. Now, I know that he didn't have to, but you're asking me to believe that he was in fear for his life and he stays around that area? Come on. It's just again, that just wouldn't make sense if I was a juror, okay? So, I mean, the thing with George Zimmerman is that, there's so much evidence on his side, the forensic evidence, a lot of, let me back up for a second, okay? A lot of people who are supporting Trayvon Martin, I don't really understand how they can. Now, I can understand how they would support him because they feel sorry for him that he got killed. That I can understand. But if you're talking about the law, I can't understand that. Because the only other story you have is Rachel Gentel's story, okay? And Rachel got caught in a lie, of course, and George Zimmerman did, okay? So, who's to say who's telling the truth, okay? But George Zimmerman's story has the forensics to back it up. He got bashed in the head. You can't deny it. He got a broken nose, okay? And that one guy, what's his name? I don't remember him. That older doctor guy said that he could count 8 separate bumps on his head. Okay, from the probably from the concrete. And then you have also witness number 6, John Good, who said that he's seen Trayvon on top of him. I don't know how you could pick Rachel's story that has no forensics at all to back it up. Okay, and say I believe her, even though I can't understand how George Zimmerman caught up with Trayvon when he was recorded as being obese, right, by the physician's assistant. That girl, I don't remember her name, but she's the one who George Zimmerman seen the day after he got pummeled, okay, after the incident. So you're going to pick, so my question to the Trayvon supporters is, so you're going to pick Rachel's story that has no forensics at all, who lied under oath, over George's testimony, who has forensics, okay? Now, I know the Trayvon supporters are very, they're very, I don't know how to say it, but, they really stick up for Trayvon. I get that. They're passionate. There you go. About what they believe. But, I mean, can you get past the passion and look at the evidence? George Zimmerman has the forensics to prove that he was getting beat. He has the witnesses. Rachel doesn't have any of that. And you're going to pick her story? And the fact that you cannot reconcile her story. Let's take a look at the prosecution. You notice they didn't use her story. They didn't say, oh, well, George Zimmerman continued to follow, and he followed him all the way up towards Trayvon's house. You notice how they conveniently ignored everything else about her testimony because it didn't make sense, and you want to believe that testimony? I don't get it. I just don't get it. But look, if that's what you want to believe, that's what you want to believe. Right now, the decision is in the jury's hands. They can't hear this video. They're not allowed to. So I'm not trying to influence anybody. I'm just looking at this case as an observer, okay? That's all I am. I'm not rooting for George Zimmerman. I'm not rooting for Trayvon. If, I have to admit, my videos are a little bit slanted towards Zimmerman, but it's not because I don't like Trayvon. I don't know Trayvon. It's not because I like George Zimmerman. I don't know George Zimmerman. It's the only reason why I'm slanted that way is because the evidence caused me to defend George Zimmerman, because that's what the evidence shows. I mean, why would I defend Trayvon's side when I don't think the evidence shows that? You see what I'm saying? So anyway, I hope you guys will consider this, and I feel bad for any loss in this case. George Zimmerman is obviously a lot of his he's going to suffer some great loss from this. Trayvon is dead. He's obviously has lost. So yeah, I mean, I get it. I feel bad for all the parties that are involved. A lot of people forget about George Zimmerman's family. His life is going to be ruined. Okay, and if his story is true, which I told you, I think the evidence more supports it than the other way around. Then he basically got his life ruined for just for acting in self-defense. Should it be that way? No. And yeah, I get the point that I can't prove 100% that George Zimmerman didn't act with ill will. I admit that. But there's so much reasonable doubt, and if I was to look at this case from a distance, I would say George Zimmerman's story actually fits more than any other story. If there's anybody else that wants to debate this, that's fine. Load up a video. I'll even post a link from this video to your video if it's a good video and it makes a lot of sense. But I want something with some good, solid evidence that supports Trayvon's side. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm more... Look, X-ray... The reason why I call myself X-ray is this, okay? I try to penetrate through all the bull and all the emotion. I try to get to the real meat of the matter. And if there's other or better truths in my video, I will tell you. I would say, yeah, this person's got, some good evidence, to support their point of view. So anyway, really, that's about it. I'm just kind of jabbering on right now. I'll probably make another video after, the trial, after the decision is made. After the judgment is made. But until then, really, for now, I'm out of here.